The next section we're going to talk about is empires. Go ahead and we're going to make a new section title, Empires, and then we're going to underline it, just like we always do. So make a new section title, Empires, and then underline, if you would please. For empires, we're going to talk about the Babylonian and Assyria empires, and we're also going to talk about the Persian Empire as well. So those two empires we're mainly going to talk about. So we'll talk about Babylon and Assyria, and we'll also talk about the Persian Empire as well. For our first bullet that we're going to write down is we're going to write down Babylonia and Assyria. So go ahead and write down for our first bullet. We're going to write down Babylonia and Assyria. So go ahead and make a bullet and write down Babylonia and Assyria. So Babylonia and Assyria were the first two major empires in this area. The first of those empires was the Babylon Empire. Babylon, with their leader Hammurabi, who we learned about before, Babylon ended up going around and conquering all these other city-states. So if you see on my map down here in the bottom left-hand corner, Babylon is down here. So Babylon is down here in the bottom. Okay, so that's where Babylon is. And they eventually went around and conquered all these other cities and gained control of all this territory. Once Babylon gained control of that territory, they were an empire. Of course, I guess they would have been an empire since we talked about the word yesterday. This meant two or more kingdoms. So I suppose after they conquered their second other big city-state, they would have been an empire at that point in time. But nonetheless, they eventually end up conquering all the other big cities along the Mesopotamia area. So they end up conquering all these other big cities, and they gained control of it. So we're going to write down for number one, Hammurabi united the cities of Sumer. Sumer just means those Sumerian civilization that we just talked about. So we talked about before how the Sumerian civilization was the first civilization in the area. Babylon eventually conquers all the other cities of the Sumerian civilization and controls all of them. So once again, for number one, write down Hammurabi united the cities of Sumer. Next thing, go ahead and make a new bullet, and we're going to write down Crossroads of Trade. So make a new bullet and write down Crossroads of Trade. The area where Babylon was located at was a pretty good central location for trade. It's along the river, and it's along trading coming from east to west. All right, so east to west trade would come through this area, and it's also along the river, so items getting transported from upriver would come down through this area. It also allowed other people that were living further south of this area, that were living on the coastline, they could transport items up to Ur, for example, and then those items would make their way up to Babylon. So it kind of was a center point of a trade. All right, so trade coming from this way, trade coming from the north, and trade coming from the south. All right, so it was kind of the point where a lot of these trade routes met at, which generated then a lot of money for Babylon, and all that money then allowed them to have more tax money. More tax money led to them hiring more soldiers. More soldiers allowed them to then conquer and control this area. All right, so that's how that kind of works there. And after you have a bullet Crossroads of Trade, when people, of course, were traveling or long distance, they traveled in caravans. So we're going to make a number one, and we're going to write down the word caravans, and then we're going to make an equal sign after caravans, and then we're going to write down group of travelers. So we're going to have one, caravans, and then we'll have an equal sign after that. And then after the equal sign, we're going to have groups of, we're going to change that word to traders. Group of traders. There we go. Write that down for number one. So number one, caravans equal sign groups of traders. So it's just a giant group of people that were trading, and they would travel together for protection. All right, so this is a big group traveling together for protection. Obviously, if you're traveling by yourself, that makes you an easy target. But if you're traveling in a large group, that makes it much harder for someone to try and rob you, especially since these guys were putting a lot of money into various goods that they were buying. Then they're transporting over a very long distance, and they didn't want to have anyone attack them and steal their stuff or kill them because they invested so much money in what they were doing. All right, so traveling in a large group allowed them then to protect the stuff that they were moving to areas, so that way they could make it to the area they're trying to go to and then make a large profit. Now, The markets in Babylon had a special name. They were called bazaar. So go ahead and make a number 2 and write down bazaars, if you would. So go ahead and make a number 2 and write down bazaars. And then we're going to make equal sign after the word bazaars. And then we're going to write down special markets. So we got 2 bazaars, equal sign, special markets. They're basically just a large open market in which there's lots of items to trade there. It's not just food, it's not just clothing, there's also jewelry as well. So it's a lot of items are in that area that you can trade for, and it's out in the open. So it's not located in just one building. It's out in the open, and there's lots of items there for you to be able to trade for and exchange for. In this picture, you'll notice down in the picture, you always kind of get asked this, why the guy riding a donkey? I don't know, just is. Also, in our picture, you'll notice that we have 3 people that are on camels, and each one of them has a lance. So the lance there looks like a very long spear. That's a lance. A lance is just a really long spear that you use from horseback, or in this case, a camelback. All right, and you use it from the back of a camel or a horse, generally from a horse, because you can ride towards the enemy, and then you can put down your lance towards the enemy, and you get in something called a crouch position. And in that crouch position, then you can, when you run into the enemy, you run your lance into them. You have the momentum of the horse carrying or camel carrying you forward, and that gives you enough inertia to then penetrate the armor of whoever the person is that you're running into. So a lance charge with your lance can easily penetrate through people's armors and such, and it hits pretty hard. All right, or you can knock someone off their horse, for example. It does quite a lot of damage when you run into someone in a good position with your lance. And a lance, of course, extends out far distance away from you because obviously, you got to point it past where the head of your horse would be at, or head of your camel in this case. You also notice there's a piece of cloth underneath the tip of the lance. The reason why there's a piece of cloth there is to absorb blood. So that way, when you stab someone with the lance and you lift up your lance, right now they're kind of lifting up their lances. That way, the blood doesn't run down the lance shaft and then get onto your hands, because the hands, of course, causes you to lose your grip, so forth and so on. So that's bad. So cloth is there to absorb the blood. Make a new bullet, if you would, please, and write down Hammurabi's Code. So, new bullet and write down Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi's Code is 282 laws that were created by him, and they're a code of laws. Okay, so when you use the word code, you're talking about, in this case, a code of laws, basically just a book of laws. And there's 282 laws that Hammurabi had put together. You read in our warm-up the other day, I gave you 5 laws that you could pick from that Hammurabi had written, but he had written 282 altogether. The main law that he's known for is number 196, that says if a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. Basically, what that means is if a man injures another man, like pokes out his eye, for example, then the person that committed the crime that also has his eye put out. So, for example, if 2 people got in a fight, one person ends up cutting off the finger of another person, then that person that cut off the person's finger would also have his finger cut off. This is why a lot of people summarize Hammurabi's code or code of laws as an eye for an eye. Okay, so the eye from the eye same comes from the code of Hammurabi that he wrote about 4,000 years ago. Law number 195 states, this is another one of his laws, if a son strikes his father, his hand shall be hend off. Hend means cut off. All right. And for cutting off of hands and such, actually, before I talk about that, go ahead and make a number 1, and we're going to write down after number 1 just the word laws. So number 1 is just the word laws. So talking about the hand being cut off, generally when they were cut off hands in the Mesopotamia area, they were cut off the right hand. The reason for that is in Mesopotamia, they didn't have silverware back in the day, forks and spoons and so forth. So when they ate food, they would eat food with their right hand. So they would always eat food with their right hand. The left hand was for cleaning yourself. So if they cut off the right hand, that meant the same hand that you cleaned yourself with, the same hand you had to eat food with, and they didn't have toilet paper back in the day. All right. So that's it for today's notes. And I'll talk to you guys.